Hi everyone. Hope you've had a wonderful Thanksgiving, Halloween weekend. I know we did. Fortunately, we have 12 pounds of candy at home, so keep your fingers crossed for us that my daughter doesn't drive us all crazy. Um, I know you've already seen one video. It's a bit of an older video I did about just an overview of creative nonfiction. This lesson is going to be geared towards some specific tips and tricks and techniques toward writing creative nonfiction. And we'll go from there. This is honestly my favorite genre of writing, so I'm really excited to get into it. And I saved this one for last because one of the things you'll notice is that the things that make good fiction, good poetry, things like that, all blend together and make for really strong creative nonfiction as well. Um, so I'm going to share my screen. Let's see if this works well, because technology has been there we go. It is working. That's exciting. All right. So you already talked about the creative nonfiction overview, introduction to creative nonfiction writing. And this is going to be from that same PowerPoint. So the same for the PowerPoint for both videos, I just combined them into one PowerPoint. And you can use the same one for both. You'll probably need to use it a bit more for this one, I would think, because it's a little bit longer. We're going to talk about some tips and techniques and tricks and how to write creative nonfiction. First thing we're going to start with is Lee Goodkind. He is considered to be the godfather of creative nonfiction. He edits and is the head of Creative Nonfiction Magazine. Their tagline is True Stories Well Told, and you're going to be reading something by him today too, as well, that goes over creative nonfiction in general. And one of the way he breaks down creative nonfiction writing, whether that's personal essay or memoir, any of those things, is he has these 5 R's. And we'll talk about each of them individually: real life, reflection, research, reading, and writing. And we will allow him the liberty to use a second letter for writing because, creative. First thing we're going to talk about is real life. Creative nonfiction is a true story about yourself from something you experienced. And in order to write about that effectively, you're going to immerse yourself in the topic and your memories and your experiences and recreate that piece from experience the same way that you would write a short story about a similar experience. The only difference is that with creative nonfiction, it has to be true. And we'll talk about the distinctions with types of truth and stuff here in a little bit. But one of the things to keep in mind is it's true and it's a real experience. It doesn't have to be something traumatic or something major, anything like that. It can just be a small experience. Some of my favorite pieces of creative nonfiction and personal essays are about hiking, or there's one that you'll read about reality television. Sometimes there's some really good essays about taking a walk, things like that. So they don't have to be these big earth-shattering traumatic pieces, although memoirs about trauma are also really good if done well. I've written a few, I've read a few that I really enjoy. But yeah, even so-called small moments that have significance to you, those are also ripe for storytelling. Second R is reflection. One of the ways to think about this is that a good piece of creative nonfiction shows and tells. So it shows by, and we'll talk about all these techniques by like recreating a story, telling it like a story, just like you would a piece of fiction, except again, it's true. But the telling also comes from the reflection. And what makes creative nonfiction so interesting and so strong is that it's about, why does this matter now? And that reflection of, why does this event, what significance does it have? Did I change because of it? Things like that. You're going to gather information and memories and events and think about your thoughts and views and opinions. How did that impact you? How did you change? How did you grow? And that's going to lead you some really strong creative nonfiction writing. Next one is research. This is not academic research, although there are elements of research that can find their way into creative nonfiction as well, like so-called academic research or library research. But when we're talking about research here, we're not talking about academic, serious library research. Instead, what we're talking about is personal research. Ask others what they remember. If it's an event you experienced with someone else, do they remember the same things you do? What do they think about it? And sometimes the differences between those lead to some really strong writing. And we'll talk about how it's okay if your experiences and your memories are different than someone else. Do self-research, old journals and diaries, social media posts, any of those things that you're like, I'm not sure if this is what happened or this is what happened. Make sure dates and details are correct, that you're remembering that this song was performed at a concert, for example, things like that. You can check for a set list. But basically, all that research is basically just examining yourself to make sure you've got your details correct. Reading. Stephen King says that in order to be a strong writer, you need to be a good reader. Um, I don't know that I would fully agree with like what necessarily a good reader is. But when it comes to this, one of the things is that as we're reading other essays, whether it's from your peers or the ones that I assign you to read, what works for you in those essays? What do you like about them? What do you not like about them? And that tells you how to approach your own writing. If you like the description in this essay, but you don't like the language, for example, maybe pay attention to, maybe you don't want to use word choice like that, or you don't want to use structure like that, but maybe you want to borrow some of that description. Use that as an example of how to write strong description, things like that. Keep an open mind. When I teach English 101, one of the first things we start out writing is a scene from watching is a scene from Ted Lasso, where it talks about being curious over judgment. That comes into play too. If you're reading an essay, what are you responding to? What are you not responding to? And that tells you how you might want to approach your own writing or how you don't want to approach your own writing. Make notes of lines, phrases, things that stand out. Sometimes those can be springboards and inspiration to writing your own piece. And of course, writing. Because we're a writing class, we have to do some writing. Apply the techniques that you're learning. Be willing to try, draft, and then be willing to play around with your drafts and revise. Take some risks and make some changes. Um, Sometimes I think the best writing is the writing that comes from play. I don't know if this structure is going to work, but I'm going to try it. I don't know if this topic is going to work, but I'm going to give it a try. And if it works, it does. It's great. And if it doesn't work, well, then you try something else. Be willing to play. Have fun with it. And that's all gut kinds, but we're also going to look at some different terms and concepts and how they'll find their way into some strong writing as well. First thing that I'll start out with is this idea of concept of truth. Emily Dickinson has this beautiful poem that says, tell the truth, but tell it slant. And that's where truth falls into play about creative, when it comes to writing personal pieces and creative nonfiction. You have the objective truth that I objectively know this is what happened. But there's also this element of truth that's personal truth. What feels true to you, in other words, as long as you're not making it up, your truth is the heart of this. We've all had experiences where we've been through something with someone else and we remember details differently, whether it's because it was a moment of trauma and we were like, I'm blocking out this, but I'm remembering this, or whether it's something really cool like a concert and you're there with one of your friends and you remember different songs and different moments. Those differences are absolutely valid. With creative nonfiction, as I'm a big reader of memoir and creative nonfiction. It's what I'm majored in, whether it's the writing of it or reading it and all of those things. I was more interested in how people experience those events and not just looking at the history of those events. Um, you do have some techniques and tools because you're not going to outright make something up. But there's one of the biggest tools in your toolbox is going to be conjecture. This is an acknowledgement of not knowing something, but I wonder if he realized how important this was to me. Any sort of phrase or word that acknowledges your readers that you may not know. It's also a way of acknowledging that you remember things even if they may not be objectively true. So an example I always use is that even now, many years later, when I look back at my Papa's death and his funeral, I mean, he was my best friend when I was growing up. He's the first person I was able to tell stories to. He's the first person that listened to all of my stories, things like that. We were really, really close. Um, and when he died, it was one of those times where even now, if I look back at his funeral, I remember that it was raining and cloudy and gloomy. In my memory, there are even those cliched black umbrellas that you always see in the movies during a funeral scene that no one actually has. There's never been something where people all have black umbrellas at a funeral. but it's a symbol that's used a lot in films to show this element of grief. Um, Objectively, though, I looked it up and the weather report says it's sunny. It was warm, it was a nice day. But even though I objectively know that is true, in my memory, it was still storming and raining. So when I wrote about it, one of the way I used conjecture to acknowledge my personal memory is that even it, as by saying something like, even though the weather report insists that it was sunny and nice and warm, in my mind it was storming, cloudy, gloomy, and raining the day we buried my papa. For me, that element of it gets at the heart of the emotion a little bit that I'm feeling. I mean, that is how I remember it because I was so sad. I'm still that sad about missing him that thinking back to that moment, it's still cloudy, as if the whole world is mourning with me. And that's one of the things that you can get across to your reader, not just, oh, I'm sad, but this is how sad I am, that I'm remembering this in a way that is not objectively true, but my mind insists that that's the case. Something else to keep in mind is that neuroscientists have found several published studies um, that by the third or fourth time we remember something, we start remembering our memory of the event instead of the actual event itself. And that means that as you're remembering your memories and not just what happened, your memories and how you feel about them are going to kind of cloud what elements you remember. That's a little trippy, I know. Basically, don't lie, acknowledge if you don't know something, um, and make sure that you're telling your truth. Central theme, all strong personal essays, whether it's a memoir essay, nature writing, any of those things, what unifies them is that there is a unifying central topic or idea behind that essay, that it's about this thing. And if it doesn't connect to that, then it probably doesn't belong. If I'm writing about, I don't know, my relationship with my cats and how happy they usually make me, then I'm not going to write about a memory I had when I had a dog. Things like that. You want to stay on track and think, what is that central topic that I'm trying to get across? It's not just my cats. Maybe it's this idea of this connection with something that's not human that was vital toward for me in a moment where I didn't have much else. Something like that. Make sure that is the underlying central theme of your essay. Keep in mind your purpose. Why am I writing this? Of course, you have to write creative writing class. But what do you want to get out of it? What do you want to convey to your readers? If you keep that purpose, that agenda in mind, it's going to help keep your writing on track. If you have this focus that I want to convey the significance of the grief of losing my grandfather and show who he was before his death. And I want readers to, who've maybe also lost someone, to identify with that, then here's your chance to really get at that. This is what readers should gain, and this is what I want to make sure is part of my essay. It helps me think, well, what are the moments I need to bring in of him that I shared to show what I'm missing when he's gone? Things like that. So what? What is the point and what does it mean outside yourself? Like I said, sometimes essays, you can tell the significance of the event early on, but it's a big traumatic thing. But also maybe it's about something like taking a walk, going on a hike, getting dinner with a friend. What is the point of that? What is the bigger meaning that it is? It's not just what this event is, but maybe it's what you've learned about society, yourself, the world, your relationship to others, your place in the grand scheme of life and the universe and everything else. Um, how can you get that meaning across to make that so what impactful? Are there tension? Is there tension and conflict? Think of the important events in your story and how they lead up to a resolution, and how can you heighten those important moments? Same way you create fiction, tension in fiction when we talked about that, it's going to find its way over to personal writing as well. Voice and tone. This is what makes creative nonfiction so much fun to me. We talked about character when we talked about fiction way back at the beginning of the semester. And a lot of this comes through is how character uses voice and tone. And it's the same thing in creative nonfiction. You are a character. You yourself are the character of the story you're telling. What does your reader need to know about you? But also, how are you feeling? What's your attitude toward the events you're writing about? And how can language be used? If I'm excited and happy and really proud of something and looking forward to something, I talk like this and I use the word and a lot and my voice gets really fast and rapid and I'm like, and this happened and then this is going to happen and I'm really excited about this. If it's something I'm dreading, my sentences are going to be a lot shorter. I'm going to say, I guess I have to do it. And I don't know how I'm going to handle it, but it's going to happen regardless. The tone and the language used in both of those instances are much different. How can you use language to get that voice and tone across? Voice says a lot about who you are. We all have something called a personal lexicon. Um, Lexicon is basically a collection of words that belong to a language. Personal lexicon means this is your collection of words and phrases that you use most often. I use words ain't and y'all like they're going out of style. And they find their way into my writing because that's who I am. One of the techniques that I've gotten from a lot of different mentors is this idea of writing how I speak. Sometimes I'll even use speech to text software, and then I'll go back and edit it because it's never perfect, it's never ideal. But the goal is with both of them that I'm using my voice and I'm telling the story like I would tell it to someone who knows me intimately. Setting, think back to the setting we talked about with poetry and what we talked about with fiction. It's the same thing. Where are these events happening? If I'm talking about a concert, I need to be able to express my experience in that concert. And the details and description I use are going to go a long way toward explaining something. If I'm at a concert and the band is my favorite and I'm writing about this amazing experience I had at this show and we had a connection with me and the music and I felt like I was connected to everyone around me, the description I use is going to be mostly based on, people around me, that feeling, that tone. If I'm writing about one that I didn't like, I'm going to pay attention to my back hurts, it smells like beer, it's too crowded, it's too hot, all of those things. So the description you use and how you use it will build the mood of the piece. You don't want to have an essay that doesn't take place anywhere. It feels like it's just not real. It's just out there in this nebulous somewhere at some time. Make sure your readers know where you are in space and time. Theme, just like we talked about with writing fiction, everything about writing fiction is about scenes, and our lives are a collection of scenes. You make those scenes, build out the details you remember, bring in dialogue, description of specific events and mini stories that you can kind of build together to show how this big overall thing means something to you. Character, again, you are a character on the page, just like with voice. What aspects of your identity do you need to include? What does the reader need to know about you as a person to understand you as the character experiencing these events? What do they need to know about other people? If I'm writing about losing someone or falling in love with someone or anything like that, I need to make sure that other person feels like a real person or a character to my readers. Again, we're not making things up, so it's not like a fictional character, but the same things that make a strong fictional character make a strong character and persona in creative nonfiction. Your reader needs to know enough about you to understand why something is significant. If I'm seeing a band just because I like music, or if I'm going to see this band because it's a band whose music has been very instrumental in me in helping me through tough moments, and I have a tattoo of them, and it's a song that I've sung my daughter, and now my daughter is getting to see them for the first time. That's a much different experience, and my reader needs to know those things. So, what does the reader need to know about you, and what do they not need to know? If it's extraneous, if it doesn't fit, then you can leave it out. Things like that. Point of view is your experience, and how do your experiences get your point or the significance of these moments across? These are focused on the I. There are a few people that will write second. There are some second person point of view, personal essays that are more directed at you that are really interesting as well. So you can play with that a bit, but make sure it's at least focused on your perspective and you're consistent with the point of view. If you decide to try something like a second person, things like that, make sure it's still at least consistent across the essay. And that's it. That's all we're going to talk about today when it comes to creative nonfiction, at least for now. Um, we'll talk about more in the weeks to come. I'll also be sending out some information about conferences and things like that to work on to join in on before the end of the semester. And happy writing. Enjoy your first foray into creative nonfiction, at least in this class.